Okay, November, what are we? November 3rd. Very good. Okay, we're up to a new chapter now in the book, chapter 6, called Natural Morality, the Jewish Masses, and Halacha. Halacha. We deal with a lot of different matters in this chapter. Very interesting stuff. Before I actually get to that, though, I want to read you something that comes from this book. It's called A Life Steady and Whole. Recollections and Appreciations of Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, edited by Elka Weber and Joel Walewski, published in 2018. If you recall, I read to you some materials from Rabbi Amital, who acknowledged that, he's not an angel and he likes kavod too. And I'm gonna read you more stuff today, hopefully from Rav Amital. But in this book, on page 39, it quotes Rav Moshe Lichtenstein. That's Rav Aaron's son, current Rosh Yeshiva. There's a few Rosh Yeshiva, but he's one of the Rosh Yeshiva at Har Zion. And he cites his father as saying as follows. He candidly acknowledged the ambivalence, he's going to say, of conflicting emotions. This is what Rav Aaron said. Well, he quoted one of the Bali Musar and he expressed agreement with it. When I enter a room and people stand, I feel bad because I am fully aware that I don't deserve it. I know how unworthy I am, how lacking in achievement I am, and that my conduct does not always live up to expectations. Nevertheless, if they don't stand, I feel even worse. And Ramosha Lichtenstein comments that it's a beautiful example of true personal modesty due to sincerity, and at the same time, candor about satisfaction and accomplishment, and its willingness to admit imperfection. So here you see Ramosha Lichtenstein recalling that Rav Aaron identified with this, that even a great person like that, if people didn't stand up, if they didn't show respect, what's all this working for learning for 50 years if there's no acknowledgement? On the other hand, it's ambiguous because he also felt that who am I that they should do this for? So I'm always attracted to individuals who acknowledge these things, who speak openly. I'm not such a fan of those who publicly won't say what they think privately. I told you already, Richard Weinberg says he too likes kavod, and if they give it to him on a plate, he'll take it, but he tries not to chase after it. Uh, okay, now this chapter, oh, lots of good stuff here. Um, Now, it begins this whole idea of natural morality. This is going to be a fascinating idea, which I think many people won't even accept the premise that we're going to be speaking about, that there's such a concept of natural morality. That is morality, not that you learn from a book or you're taught it's in the Gemara or anything like that, but it's natural, like a parallel, I guess you would say, to natural law. Where does this natural morality come from? That we shall see. The problem is that what happens when your natural morality is at odds with what at least appears on the surface to be a Torah rule or Torah ethics. We will get to that. Rav Kook, in his Guide to the Perplexed, we know that Rav Kook wrote a Guide to the Perplexed, Livuchei Hador, and he states, if you look in chapter 3, and you can see this online, including with English translation and Aryeh Scar's translation, not all of the translated online on Safaria, but Aryeh Scar's translation will be out soon with his notes. It's really going to be a wonderful volume. Rav Kook states an important point. He says that the medievals tried to prove religion. They tried to prove tried to show through various proofs. And there are still people in our world who try to prove. I would say prove in quotes. Aisha Torah used to do things like this, and it's like a hyper intellectualism where they try to. I was once at one of these seminars at a Limud conference of all places. I spoke at a Limud conference up in the Catskills at the Nevele. It was maybe the last event that Neville ever did. You could see the whole place was run down, but they had the Limud conference there. And one of the people speaking, he was given like a hyper intellectual approach, so that after you hear what he says, in his mind at least, you have no choice if you're intellectually honest but to become religious and accept Torah Judaism. And I remember saying to him afterwards that it's very medieval, but it's totally in opposition to what so many thinkers have to say about what religion's all about. I didn't need to get into Soloveitchik, the existential, Kierkegaard's, the just the acceptance. You choose, you accept the existential leap of faith. But this guy didn't know what I was talking about, and to him it appeared obvious. But Rav Kook says that this medieval approach does not work in our day. He says, on the contrary, to bring people close to religion, we have to stress justice, righteousness, the humane values of Judaism. That's because that's what people were looking for in his day. They were leaving Judaism because they didn't see that it was responsive to the issues of the day. They wanted social justice and everything. And his whole point was we have to show Judaism has this as well. Really, what Rav Kook's saying, I mean, obviously it can be updated, adjusted in every generation, but we see it's obvious. Think of all the people you know, if you know any, who converted to Judaism, or those who became religious, Baalei Tshuva. Did you ever meet one in your entire life who says, I converted to Judaism or became religious because I became convinced of that I wanted to take the yoke of the law upon me, or even I was convinced of, maybe later they're convinced of Judaism, but that's what drove them. It's almost always it's, I mean, I've seen it again and again. They're at a Friday night and they see the beautiful like Shabbos meals and the family sitting around, and the white tablecloth that Soloveitchik was so annoyed with when the OU had a whole thing pushing the white tablecloth. But someone pointed out to me, there's a nanny, I think it was, who converted to Judaism after being with Chabad family, and now she has thousands of followers. And of course, she's not saying that she was convinced by Torah. That comes later. It was seeing the beautiful family life, and that's what's attractive. People find attractive in Judaism, and you're going to say, well, maybe, well, this is all fraud. It should be the Rambam's principles. It should be Torah, this and that. But this is what Rav Kook is saying. Rav Kook is saying that there's other things that are going to bring people closer. And he says that the real problem of modern Jews, and modern, he's talking the late 19th, early 20th century, is not scientific and philosophical challenges to Torah. He already gave ways we could deal with that. We discussed this already last class. That's not the challenge. The challenge is the ethical challenge. And I dare say 100 years later, that's still the challenge. And it's become even a more acute challenge, I believe. Many people will tell you, I first confronted this freshman year as a student in Brandeis University. I was on the third floor and there was someone on the first floor. Um, Went to Ramaz, came from a religious family, and he was not going to shul on high holidays. I wasn't there Rosh Hashanah, we were all there Yom Kippur, and I asked him why not, and he said that he's gay and Judaism doesn't accept him for who he is, and therefore he doesn't want Judaism. Of course, he came from like an Orthodox perspective, so therefore at least looking back at it, it seems he didn't take conservative reform seriously. So there's only one type of Judaism, and if that type of Judaism doesn't accept him, who he is, then he doesn't want Judaism. I mean, I can imagine many people saying, "Well, you don't have to be Orthodox; you can be conservative, reform, whatever." But that's not what he said. So, and this, of course, is a huge challenge. And there's many challenges that if you ask people today what troubles them about Judaism, you go to college campuses, you speak to high school classes, it's ethical issues. We're going to see another ethical issue. I don't think people today really focus on this, but when I was in high school, it was always slavery. How can you have slavery? We'll see what Rav Kook says about slavery, by the way. I think you'll find it quite interesting, provocative as well. But I mean, these are the sort of things that trouble people, and Rav Kook says that's the issue, and we must explain the Torah so that you don't have this conflict. It's not in contradiction to modern ethical values. Are you always going to get rid of the conflict? Perhaps not, but you certainly have to make the effort. And Rav Kook says that's the modern approach to what the medievals, when they were confronted with scientific challenges. So, for instance, if Aristotle is accepted and Aristotle says the world was never created and the Torah says it was created, so you have to respond to that. So, today we have to respond to ethical challenges. And he says if you don't do that, people will reject the Torah because they will see that it is in opposition to what he calls chukei hamusar hativim. It's an opposition to natural law, what we regard as basic ethical values. And as we'll soon see, you can't tell people, as they tried to tell me when I was in yeshiva, well, you just have to uproot these ethical values that you're expressing because they're not authentic ethical values. You're simply repeating Western ideas, but the Torah is opposed to Western ideas. First of all, that approach is never going to work in practice because you can't just uproot what you think is an ethical feeling. And second of all, as Rav Kook says, as Rav Kook is going to say, you don't want to do that because the ethical feelings people have, by and large, are coming from an authentic source. We will get into this in a minute. I want to read you, though, two amazing passages from Rav Kook. The first appears in Shmona Kvatzim, Book 1, paragraph or section 278. Listen to this. The word, written or spoken, is never permitted to obstruct the straight intellect. This is a great principle of the Torah, whether regarding the most exalted perspectives or the slightest details. The word, he said, can never obstruct the straight intellect. What this means is that just because something appears in the Torah or appears in the Gemara doesn't mean it has a veto power, I would call it, over your intellect. If what you're reading makes no sense, then you need to look at it again and interpret it differently. I mean, the Rambam already sets forth this principle when it comes to scientific matters and philosophical matters. When it speaks of God having a hand, an outstretched hand, are you going to say, therefore, that because the Torah says that God has a hand, you must believe God has a hand and he's a physical being? No. Are you going to say when it says the Tower of Babel's tower reaches to heaven, so that it means it literally goes up miles and miles? No. So just because something is written, you have the words on a page, that doesn't mean necessarily that the words mean what they say they mean. Shir Hashirim. According to Chazal, it doesn't mean what it appears to mean on the page. So this is going to be important, even with, it's not so simple to get up and say, well, this is the Torah's view on this or that. And you're going to say, well, why isn't it so simple? You see what the Torah says. Well, the Torah says a lot of things. The Torah says an eye for an eye. Do we do an eye for an eye? No. So just because the words of the Torah or the Gemara say one thing, that's not enough to say this is the absolute truth, as it were. We're going to get into this in a minute, but that's the first important principle. In other words, you do not blindly submit because you have an intellect also, and your intellect was given to you from God. And therefore, if your intellect contradicts something in the Torah, and this is also going to be your moral values. If they contradict something, it is not so simple to just say, well, we reject our moral values. Number two, this is where he speaks, they really focus more on moral values. The other is mostly on intellect. Also, Shmona Kvatzim, Book 1, paragraph 75. A person must not allow the fear of heaven to push aside his natural morality, Hamusara TV. Every one of us has a natural morality. Where does this natural morality come from? We'll see in more detail in a minute, but just to anticipate, it comes from you inside you. It comes from your soul. It comes from your sense of right, good, and bad. Your conscience, which is not just something tabula rasa. This is something, if you raised in a Jewish environment and study Torah, you develop a conscience, a natural morality. Obviously, if you were raised in a different culture, you'd have different natural morality. So it's not a natural morality that just like Rousseau would speak about, you're just born with it. No, there's a dialectic here. But yet, this is divine as well. We're going to see there's two revelations here. There's a revelation of the Torah, and then there's also a revelation that's expressed through this natural morality. So you can have a situation where your so-called fear of heaven pushes aside your natural sense of morality because you're told that to be pious, you have to do X, but X or Y goes against your natural morality. Rav Kook says a person must not allow the fear of heaven to push aside his natural sense of morality because then that's not a pure fear of heaven. He says, what is a sign of a pure fear of heaven? Yirat Shamayim? That a person's natural sense of morality rises in accordance with Yirat Shamayim. That is, your natural morality and Yirat Shamayim go together. Your fear of heaven goes up and your natural morality goes up. They're connected and they go down together. But if there's a contradiction, if your fear of heaven's up here and that causes your natural morality to be rejected, well, then there's a problem. There's a problem either with your natural morality or your fear of heaven. Listen to this. If you can imagine a Yirat Shamayim of such a type that without its influence on a person's life, he would be a better person. That is, imagine a Yirat Shamayim and then take it away and say, without this so-called Yirat Shamayim, this person would do more good and be a better person. This shows that the Yirat Shamayim is a false Yirat Shamayim. So how could you say such a thing? Because your natural morality is also valid. Yirat Shamayim is also valid. But if the more Yirat Shamayim you have, it makes you into a less moral person, then there's a problem with your Yirat Shamayim. And as I say in the book, this passage implies that some of what passes for piety today among some people is really just what we can call a corrupted religiosity. If you have someone whose fear of heaven, his Yirat Shamayim, his piety, let's use the word piety, causes him to be engage in thievery or all sorts of other things, that's not a real piety. Now, how can Rav Kook say this about natural morality? I think many people won't even accept the concept of natural morality. You don't have this in the Gemara. He can say this because, as I said, the soul itself is implanted by the divine. The intuitive feelings of our soul have a divine source, and therefore they must be seen as pure. Natural morality is nothing less than a divine revelation. And he describes this, the patriarchs, he says, had this sort of natural morality. They lived in a pre-Torah era, so they had to strive for perfection without the benefit of the written Torah. Now, once you have this idea, if you're willing to go with me as far as we've gone so far and accept this idea of natural morality, and by the way, if you don't accept this idea of natural morality, then you have a problem because what do you do with your conscience? Are you going to deny that you have a conscience? Is a conscience simply something made up, or is a conscience more than that? I'm talking about a Torah conscience because everyone can have a conscience, and even everyone's conscience could have a divine origin. But people raised in a good Jewish environment, it doesn't come, as I said, just from scratch. Now, because Rav Kook accepts this idea of a natural morality that is part of what it means to be a Jew, this then leads to step number 2, which takes us even one step further. Namely, that, and it's a unique understanding. I really think it's unique of the relationship between Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, and the masses. Look, anyone who has studied in yeshiva knows that it inculcates a certain condescension for the masses, the Am Haaretz. You don't want to be an Am Haaretz. That's and the masses. There's a condescension. And yet Rav Kook is going to have an entirely different approach. Rav Kook's originality is his really his I don't want to say subversiveness, although there is an element of subversiveness, but his looking for the can't figure out get the bait. Really, the dynamite view he has here is that there's an element of natural morality which is found among the masses, the religious masses, which is not found among the Talmidei Chachamim, the scholars. Now let this sink in for a minute, because we're taught traditionally in yeshivas in the Orthodox world that there's a one-way street. The masses are consumers of that which the rabbis, the Talmidei Chachamim, say. And the rabbis, they're the ones always preaching to us, giving sermons, telling us what to do. So we are recipients, we're receptacles from what the rabbis give to us. Rav Kook is going to adopt a completely new perspective. Yes, the masses have to receive from the scholars. After all, is this muktzah? Can I use a tea bag on Shabbos? What's the halacha of this? We need them to teach us this. They teach us Gemara also. But the rabbis, the Talmidei Chachamim, the Gedolim even, they are going to need the masses as well, because the masses are going to give them something which is just important, if not more important, the natural morality which they are missing. Now, how is it that the Talmidei Chachamim are missing anything? They're Talmidei Chachamim. That's what they do. They study. Uh, but they are missing something, and they're missing something very important, and they can only get it by going to the masses, the Amei Haaretz, that unfortunately in their world they've been indoctrinated to look down upon. Before we go on, let's not forget that the masses Rav Kook is speaking about here are not like today the masses in American modern Orthodoxy or Haredi Orthodoxy, where people go to Daf Yomi and they're Talmidei Chachamim. No, we're speaking about people who their Jewish education ended usually for most of them like when they're 12, 13 years old, and they went out to work. This idea of a Torah learning for everyone, that was not the standard approach years ago. We've spoken about this many times. And yet, even for these people, or maybe precisely for these people, they have something that the Talmidei Chachamim don't have. Rav Kook says, listen to this. The learned ones, the Talmidei Chachamim, must always acquire for themselves as much as possible the natural talent of the Amei Haaretz, whether it be regarding an outlook on life or natural morality. Talmidei Chachamim, they need natural morality. Why? He says that the simple Jew stands above his learned co-religionists, the Talmidei Chachamim, in certain areas. And why is this? Well, because the Talmid Chacham, he spends all his time learning Gemara, let's say. And when you do that, you create an artificial type of person, because you're removed from natural feelings. Everything is involved in the book, and the book learning can create immorality. The Gemara speaks about Talmidei Chachamim who are able to be matar et hasheretz, to make pure the impure. They could take something that's non-kosher and find through their pilpul all sorts of ways to make it kosher. What keeps them in check, as it were? What keeps them in check are the masses. Think about your parents or your grandparents who maybe weren't learned, but they knew what it meant to be a Jew. They knew morality. And if the rabbi were to say something crazy, they'd be the first one to say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because sometimes the rabbis are so wrapped up in their learning that they're disconnected from what it means to be a healthy Jew. So they need, Rav Kook explains, the religious masses to bring them back into the middle, this connection of natural morality, because their morality is only Talmudic morality. And Talmudic morality can lead to all sorts of problems because it's not connected to the here and now. He says that I'll read you another passage. He says that the masses lead the scholars to lead a healthy life, chayim bri'im, with the implication that life just devoted to scholarship in an entirely yeshivish community is missing something, but it is missing something. We need, Rav Kook elsewhere explains, this is what a holy community is. Holy community has the Beinonim, it has the Rishonim, it has everyone. Rav Kook says in Orot, if you don't have the Rishonim, you're missing something as well, because they bring something to the table as well, their naturalness, their connection. And, before I read you some more passages of Rav Kook, just let me give you two examples of this. One which I mentioned in the book, and one which I've been thinking of, I'm sure many of you have been thinking of in recent months. The one I mentioned in the book it deals with the sexual abuse scandal. I mentioned this before, but if you have this Das Torah perspective, if you have this perspective that everything comes from the rabbis, you have a big problem here. Because how can you explain the fact that you had rabbis, including some great rabbis, covering up matters of sexual abuse? I mean, today we can all recognize how wrong this was, but it was the second level rabbis and the masses, I'm talking about the Haredi world now, who refused to accept this. Well, how can this work? How can this make sense? If you're a follower of Cook's perspective, it makes perfect sense because I mean, how do you know about the damage of sexual abuse? You don't see this from the Gemara. You don't see this in the Torah. We learn this from modern psychology, from our intuitive sense. This is something that the Talmudic scholars are completely isolated from. So they would never come to this on their own. They'll simply look at it. Well, is it Masira? Are you turning someone in? And this, I mean, and what's really the Isser? I mean, is it a Doraisa or Rabbanan? They don't ask the simple point, like, is it right? What's going on here? You need the masses, the religious masses who still have their natural morality to set you right. And one of our listeners sent me a video, which I haven't listened to. I'm going to listen to in the car tomorrow, hopefully. But I was thinking about it even before he sent it to me, although I'll hear what it's from Rav Shelat, Rav Yitzchak Shelat, the great Rosh Hashiva Mali Adumim, the great scholar of Rambam and so many other things. He gave a sikha last week in which he spoke about how the problem in the Haredi world, why they don't see what everyone can see about the draft and all that that they need to serve, is because they don't learn Emunah and they don't learn Tanakh. They just learn Gemara. Let me just expand on this a bit. If The only way, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, and people who have been listening to me long enough knows that I have great respect, even if I disagree with the Haredi rabbis. But what I'm going to say right now, by the way, is shared by, as far as I know, every Haredi person I've ever spoken to. Uh, but so let me say it as, I guess, as well as I can say it. Only someone who spent his entire life within the walls of the yeshiva and not had any real involvement in anything out of that, and by which I mean even natural morality, could come to a conclusion that you could live in a country and assume that because you were in a certain community, that your sons don't need to go and defend not only everyone else, but defend your own families. I mean, and now we know that for the Haredi world, it's not about learning Torah and all that. I mean, they say that, but the attitude is that no one in that community should go to the army ever. And all the Haredim I know lots of Haredim, every single one I know, and don't say, well, I know the more modern ones. That's not true. But everyone I've ever spoken to has acknowledges that, of course, Haredim should go to the army, as long as they create, frameworks that they can keep a Haredi lifestyle. So have they created this framework? Rabbi Yeshua Pfeffer and others say they have. Whether they have, I don't know. But at least in theory, everyone I know says that. And yet you have this ideology that says that no, it's okay for the modern Orthodox and for the irreligious. They have to defend us. We don't, that's not our job. Okay, how can you come up with a thing like that? No one who actually asks himself, is this moral? Is this right? Is this acceptable? That my children should not risk it all, only your children. No one who has a sense of natural morality, and I think this is what Rav Shalat was speaking about when he spoke about studying Tanakh and Emunah, a wider perspective. I mean, maybe Israelis, I mean, I haven't spoken really to Israelis, but every American grows up just by being in America with a sense of right and wrong. And I challenge you to find anyone in the Haredi world who will look you in the face and say, "You're right. I mean, you're wrong. That because I'm in this community, then I'm special, and your children should risk their lives and die, but we don't have to." I mean, it's so I think we're seeing what Rav Kook spoke about very clearly now. What happens when you lose touch with natural morality? And in that world, it's very important that only the Gedolim can lay down the law. Because if you go into that world and you ask the average person, of course they're going to agree also, of course. And many of them have said, I've seen it online, I don't understand how this could be the case. It doesn't make sense. But in our world, we don't make these decisions. That's why we have Gedolim. Okay, well, according to Rav Kook, that's not why you have Gedolim, because Gedolim can't just make decisions like that if they're removed completely from natural morality. Yeah, very, very important point. And when we look at Rav Kook, so the basic moral sensibility of the masses is important in keeping the Talmudic scholars' moral sense in line. The masses, they need the Gedolim and the rabbis to teach them halacha and chumash and all sorts of things. But the rabbis need the masses because the masses keep them honest, as it were, keep them in line with pure morality, which in the base medrash you can lose it. Uh, it's not surprising, perhaps, that Ratzi Yehuda Cook did not release a number of these passages because this is versive. I get it. And remember, however, that Rav Kook is speaking about here. He's speaking about simple Jews he says, who haven't been damaged by cultural influence. What do I mean by that? Um, Today, it's very hard today in the general world because we're so influenced by Western values. That it's hard to know. I mean, it's hard to really know what is a Jewish value and what's not. But if you think about the simple Jews in Rav Kook's day, these were people who were not in Eastern Europe, were not mixing with the outside world, and yet they still understood that some things are morally correct and morally incorrect. And you can't say to me, well, I just acknowledge that we're influenced by Western values. So therefore, by saying that people have the responsibility to go to the army to defend their families, this has nothing to do with Western values to say that. That's what I would claim. Um, Rav Kook, he goes for, well. I don't need to go on and on. I see I've given many examples, but let me give you one thing he says in one of his it's in Hayah, it's in elsewhere to show you where Rav Kook is coming from. It's a fascinating point he makes. We say when we finish. When you leave the base medrash. I think also in the Hadron they say it as well. What do you say? Yeah, we say in the Hadron we thank God. Why? Because he's this comes from the Gemara in Brachos that he's put us in the Beit Midrash and he hasn't put us among those who sit at the corners, sit in the street corners. Yoshe Karnos, we say Karanos, however you want to pronounce it. Because I rise early and they rise early. I rise early for words of Torah. They rise early for frivolous talk. So what does it mean? People sit in the street corners. If you look in Rashi there, Rashi says it means shopkeepers, those who make a living. So you're giving a bracha that I'm here to learn Torah, not like people sit in the street and they have to make a living. Rav Kook said this doesn't make sense because you're going to look down on people who are making a living. People make a living are honored by our sages. How could the sages speak in such a way about them and contrast people learning Torah versus people who are making a living? Rav Kook says that there's a mistake in the Gemara. He says instead of Kuf Reish Nun Vav Taf, what originally appeared was Kuf Reish Vav Taf, an abbreviation for Karkasaot V'Teatrot, for circuses and theaters. Now this is so Rav Kook is saying that the Gemara originally meant that my portion was not set. I didn't set my portion among those who go to circuses and theaters. Rather, I learned Torah. Now, Rav Kook, there's no source for this in the Bavli. This is a speculative emendation. However, I do have to say that he doesn't mention this because it appears he must have known this. Although, as I recall, it doesn't mention it. The Yerushalmi actually says this. The Yerushalmi says, "Lo natata chalki bevate tartaot bevate karkasiot." And Ratzi Yehuda Kook mentions this, but Rav Kook, as I recall in his piece, does not mention this. Now, whether Rav Kook is right or not, there could be a different version. The Bavli could say one thing, Yerushalmi another, but you see he's troubled by this degrading of the masses, even if it's only with regard to the Torah scholars. I mean, it's true you could honor the working people, but compared to Torah scholars, you look down on them because the Torah scholar is doing the ultimate. Everyone else is just working for a living second best. And that's, of course, the attitude you'll get in much of the Haredi world today. But Rav Kook didn't agree with this. He thought that this is an honorable pursuit. And there's nothing to look down on at all. Yes, some people were Torah, so that's special. But that doesn't mean you contrast in a negative way to the person who's earning a living. So I put this in the book because I thought it really it's explainable because of Rav Kook's approach in these matters. Um, okay, so I cite a number of other passages. I don't need to go through many more of these passages, but the same basic idea, focusing on what makes the religious Jewish masses special. This is an idea that you won't find. You won't not I would say you won't find in the Haredi world. I don't know if you find in the modern Orthodox world as well. I've never really heard this, but I think it's great stuff. But this leads to something else, what I think is of real interest. Um, it's not just that the masses have a natural morality. The religious masses, which when I say masses, I mean religious masses, have a natural morality. They also have an insight that the sages do not have. And this Rav Kook doesn't say explicitly, but it appears through many passages, I believe. Because how do you explain the fact that it was and here he's talking about even about the irreligious, the rabbis, it was the 19th century, and the rabbis were telling people not to go to the land of Israel, not to have any connection to this land, wait for the Mashiach to come. And yet the masses, religious first and then non-religious, saw that this was a mistake, that God was summoning us to return to the land of Israel. Here's another example, I argue, that Rav Kook is influenced by seeing that it's Dafka, not the Talmidei Chachamim. Yes, there were some Talmidei Chachamim, absolutely, but most of the Talmidei Chachamim, their attitude was Shev al Taseh. Let's wait in Europe. We'll see what happens. Not to actually go to Eretz Yisrael. When you see that this prophecy almost came from the masses, religious and non-religious, you see that the rabbis don't have everything. And sometimes they need to take a step back and look to see what's out there, to go out of their tent. Now, so why do you need the rabbis at all? Just follow your natural morality. Um, how do you know if your morality is not just a spur of the moment sort of thing? Is not just secular morality? You need. There is a dialectic. You can't. You need the masses and you need the rabbis. They have to work together. The masses are going to try to bring the rabbis back to a more healthy sense of the world, but the rabbis are there to make sure that the masses' sense of morality doesn't go too far off and fall off a cliff. You need them both. Each one is essential in a Jewish community, just like that drasha about like what are they about the lulav and the esrog. They talk about the different types of Jews. You need everyone there, but make no mistake about it. When you speak about when you speak about natural morality and you have a feeling of what something should be, Torah texts are then going to be analyzed after this natural morality is apparent. And Linvuchei Ador, Rav Kook says that our generation, the task is to create harmony between Torah and natural morality. But it's not like you have natural morality here and Torah there and you're unifying them. The natural morality is going to influence you. If you when you take a figure, I'll take Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, someone who I had conversations with, you have others, sensitive Torah scholars. They know from the get-go that certain conclusions just are impossible to be reached. When you ask them a question, if something appears like very negative about non-Jews or something, they already have a natural morality in their mind telling them what a Torah value is. So they are going to be inclined to interpret it one way. But that's no different than the other side, who doesn't have this natural morality, is going to be inclined to interpret it another way. So, for instance, let's say you know through natural morality that slavery is wrong. I don't think I'm going out on much of a limb to say that everyone listening to this class would agree that slavery is a great evil. Um, um, okay, well, if that's your understanding, You are then going to examine the passages in the Torah dealing with slavery and the Gemara. You're going to look at them very differently from one whose only judgment on moral issues is based only, so he claims, on Torah texts. Of course, there never is judgment based only on Torah texts because everyone comes to texts with an assumption already. Um, from Rav Kook's perspective, someone who is comfortable with owning other people and therefore with this approach then interprets the Torah, that's already a problem because he's coming to it without the proper natural morality. So his interpretations are going to be inappropriate and improper. What Rav Kook does is acknowledge the existence of a second sphere of authority. That is the sum of all matters and very important. There is a second sphere of authority, natural morality. And when you reach a conclusion on ethical issues, it isn't just based on Torah sources out there, as it were. No, it's based on the dialectic between Torah sources and natural morality. And natural morality actually precedes the Torah texts. Derech Eretz comes before Torah. And Rav Kook says natural morality is the basis of it all. Um, in other of his writings, we see that Rav Kook's views of morality are even more complicated because he agrees, and I see, Janine, you're absolutely correct, that Rav Kook agreed with Rav Kook about respecting the morality of the masses. I'll read you some texts of Rav Amital in a little bit. I think he probably is channeling Rav Kook because some of these ideas of Rav Kook were published already long ago, even though many of them only were released recently. But Rav Kook goes even further. Rav Kook doesn't just speak about a natural morality. Rav Kook holds that there is a developing morality. Later, I don't know if I'll get to it today, you'll see Rav Lichtenstein, what he has to say about this, and Rav Sabato channeling Rav Kook in response to this. But we've already moved, we've done a lot today. We've spoken about natural morality, radical enough. And then we've moved into the idea that the masses are the holders of this natural morality, which has been lost by many of the scholars. Also radical. How about even the next step? That morality is not constant, according to Rav Kook. There is a notion of developing morality. And I think historically, this is seen very clearly. Um, if I were to show you, we take any figure, let's say, in the medieval period, take any figure from 300 years ago, 400 years ago. You tell them that slavery is immoral. What do you mean slavery is immoral? Well, why is slavery immoral? Aristotle said that some people are born into slavery. That's their fate. We're much more sensitive to these matters than previous generations. Anyone who's a Talmud Chacham, you know, when you study these sources, the early sources, you don't have people raising the question. You don't have Rishonim raising the question, well, what gives us the right to enslave someone? How is that appropriate? No one talks like that. That's what you start to see in the 19th century. No accident. People started, all the various issues that we have, there's moral issues about, these did not trouble people in earlier generations. So you can look at this in a few different ways. You could say, well, that's then the proof. You know, if this didn't trouble the Noda B'Yehuda and it troubles you, it shows you that your morality is based on Western ideas, and it shows you don't have a true Jewish morality. Because obviously the generations decline, and if you're telling me that you have something that the Noda B'Yehuda or you know the Amshel Shlomo, the Maharsha didn't have, then that shows it's invalid. Unless you adopt the approach that Rav Kook, that no, that God's world develops in such a way that even though those people are greater tzaddikim than us and greater Talmidei Chachamim, there are certain things that only in each generation light is revealed, that we are standing on the shoulder of previous people, and that as we move in the direction of the Messianic era, certain insights are revealed to us that they did not have. And as I said, it's obvious. There was a scholar, a historian, Moses Findley. I mentioned him in the book. I don't know what happened because in my original draft, I put in parentheses his real name, which I think is Finkelstein. But somehow it didn't make it in, and I don't know why. I read it over. I must have just agreed when it was suggested to take it out. But he is Jewish, and he coined a phrase, teleological fallacy. What's the teleological fallacy? He said it about historians. He said that often writers, historians, others assume that their values, the values that they hold, let's say civil rights or whatever it is, would be in existence from the beginning of time, and therefore they reinterpret texts um, in that fashion on the assumption that earlier people were asking the same questions, and they weren't. That's what he calls a teleological fallacy. And the fact is that, as I said, slavery was taken for granted. Um, Many other ethical matters that trouble us today were taken for granted then. And yet Rav Kook says that I mean, you can't tell people in the 20th century and 19th century that their consciences were leading them astray if they have a problem with owning someone with slavery. Um, because after all, as we saw, your natural fear of heaven cannot, your fear of heaven, so-called piety, can't push aside natural morality. Furthermore, Rav Kook says as follows. Pay attention to this. What I'm reading now is the quote, how Tamar Ross summarizes it, but this is exactly what he says. If a particular moral intuition reflecting the divine will achieves widespread popularity, it will enable the Halachic authorities to find genuine textual basis for this new understanding. That is, if the religious community as a whole comes to a conclusion that something is immoral, this moral intuition has to be regarded as reflecting the divine will. And the next step, the halachic authorities will find a way to deal with this and will provide a textual understanding, authorization for this. What do I mean by textual authorization? Let me read you now word for word from Rav Kook. If a question arises about some law of the Torah, according to which ethical notions indicate should be understood in a different way, that is, you have a law in the Torah. Apparently it says to do one thing. Your moral ethical notions tell you, when I say your, I'm talking about the people as a whole, that your moral notions tell you that it can't be done this way. It goes against our basic morality. Then truly, if the Sanhedrin decides that this law pertains only conditions which no longer exist, a source on the Torah will certainly be found for us. The Sanhedrin, therefore, in an era, of course, when we have a Sanhedrin, will look at this and will decide that this law only applies in certain circumstances. It doesn't apply in the circumstances that you think it applies. And furthermore, the Sanhedrin will find a source, to justify what they're saying. I'll give you examples of this in a few minutes. Um, Again, you have what appears to be the Torah law, and even it was understood in previous generations as a Torah law. But today, the general sense, the sense of the faithful, which is divine intuition, that is placed, intuition, morals which is placed by the divine, the Sanhedrin in that generation will find a way to make the law no longer actionable, no longer practical. And not only will they do that, they will find a Torah source for this. Because the world has been set up in this way, that the Torah can be revealed in different generations in a different way. This isn't conservative Judaism. This is Rav Kook speaking. The Sanhedrin is able to take into account new moral and religious insights. This isn't something invented due to modern considerations. And in response to Moshe Seidel, he absolutely insists that this has nothing to do with a development of ethics. Sorry, not development, an evolution of Torah teachings. I use the word developing morality, but not in the sense that just because today, don't understand this to mean that because today we think something, therefore it has to be true. No. What he means is as follows, that it's always there in the Torah, but it's latent, and we didn't recognize it. The morality has developed in a way that now we see that something is acceptable, but it's in the Torah. That is, it's not just a Western idea that now we're going to read the Torah with this Western idea and artificially create something. No. If it's a true moral idea, if this is something that Klal Yisrael as a whole has a moral intuition about, then this is a true idea and it's a Torah idea. The Noda B'Yehuda didn't recognize this idea. Noda B'Yehuda doesn't need to recognize this idea. Different moral ideas are expressed in different generations over time. They develop, but they don't develop because of the Western world. They develop through the Torah world. And that's why he doesn't like the word evolution, because the Torah's teachings are not evolving. Um, and he wouldn't even say that morality is developing. He would phrase it as our sense of morality has developed. But it's not an evolution per se of Torah. No, Torah is the same Torah, but we could not see it. Every generation, different parts of it is revealed. There's a continuing revelation. God's revelation is revealed in each generation. It's part of the truth of the oral Torah, basically. So this opens up, of course, a can of worms, because how far are you going to take us? But that's why the Sanhedrin is important, because the Sanhedrin is a stop. It prevents things from getting out of hand. The Sanhedrin is able to declare what is true morality, Torah morality, and what is just we're aping secular morality. I mean, you'd have today, think of the questions that would arise today about gender issues, let's say, all sorts of things like this. Um, the Sanhedrin would be the one to determine, uh, is this the true morality, which now we can say is Torah morality, in which case we will find a source for it, a drasha, we're to see what the role of drashas are for Rav Kook, or is this not, is this just Western ideas which we can't accept? So I think it's important, the notion of a Sanhedrin here. But the truth is latent. But only with the development of moral ideas in a changing society, which is driven by God, can people sense the new moral insight. Um, Rav Yuval Sharlo, I quoted Rav Yuval Sharlo, he's a leading thinker in the religious Zionist world in Israel. He says that there is moral progress in the area of human rights, and religious people believe this is the will of God. I think in the Ralbag has a one of his commentaries in Navi, he talks about how you know what a king should do to put fear into the enemy? He should take the opponents and not only kill the enemies but kill their families. I think it's the Ralbag says that, and that'll put fear in, and that's what war is all about. Now today we would say that that's immoral, um, and we're not wrong. We're right. We're not judging the Ralbag. He lived in a different era. And it's not that Western values have shown us this, although Western values have, but these are Torah ideas. But in Rav Kook's understanding, at least, they develop over time. Our consciousness of them develops over time. Now, later, next class, I'll read to you, Rav Lichtenstein has a discussion about slavery and how he dealt with this, and because it's obviously immoral, but the Torah. And I'll show you how Rav Sabato, though, pushes him, though. But what about Rav Kook's idea that we can speak of developments, and Rav Lichtenstein is I'm not even going to say he's very hesitant. He rejects that. So we'll get to that, though, next class. I see we're not going to have time. But in the book on page 106, I quote Rabbi Lamb, who says explicitly that's that all legal systems, including Jewish law, there's developments, and laws sometimes are on the books, but they become inoperative because of moral argument. And it's hard to look. I mean, we have texts from Walter Wurzburg. We have all the modern Orthodox thinkers basically acknowledge this. I mean, no one today believes, let's say, in slavery or lots of other matters we're going to speak about. So then what does that say, though, about Torah morality? And Rav Kook provides an answer, that that Torah morality does not have to be the same in every generation. And it's no different in saying that George Washington had slaves, but that doesn't mean he's an immoral person. In those days, people had different understandings. Now, this idea is something which I think people who think about it will see as correct. And it solves lots of problems. I think, though, on a surface level, many people will reject it and say that this is absolutely incorrect. And I definitely think in the haredim world, this would be regarded as over the line and an undermining of Torah values. But if you push them on the hard issues, I think they will have to conclude, many of them, that due to the hashgacha pratis, Rav Henkin, Rav Henkin says something similar. He says that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. I should have put this in the book. For whatever I know this passage, I've quoted it many times. For some reason, when I was writing the book, it didn't occur to me. Rav Henkin says that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash had a positive element to it because then we can no longer judge capital cases, crimes, and give the death penalty. And he says that that's in line with how over time now we've become more sensitive and therefore we can't kill anyone through the death penalty. It's like we're not capable of it. He says that we move beyond that, as it were. Uh, and it's not a problem because in the Messianic era, he's assuming you'll never have to do that. But Rav Henkin is just, he's looking at the reality, how people feel, I guess. But Rav Kook, this is tied also to Kabbalistic things. The Lurianic ideas of the holy sparks being released. What does that mean, holy sparks? Through all sorts of holy sparks are being released in this world, and we're going up until we get to the Messianic era. I mentioned already this idea. How do you explain the fact that today you have people doing the good because it's good, not because God commands it, just because it's good? That shouldn't happen. We should be at a lower level than in previous generations. And yet we see in the world at large people who reject God yet do the good. So we see that in certain ways humanity is moving up. And Rav Kook sees this as applying in Torah as well. Actually, in just in 2 minutes, there's a few texts I want to show you, but I only have time for two of them. Let me read you the Rav Amital, so you get a sense that it's really, I should have done this before. I see in my notes I should have, but let me read you Rav Amital, what he has to say, because it was mentioned. Read you three passages, and then we'll end, and then I will I'll deal with Rav Lichlasi next class. I'll also deal with Rav Yaakov Koppel Schwartz. I mentioned Rav Yaakov Koppel Schwartz before. Here's Rav Yaakov Koppel Schwartz. This Rav and posek and thinker in the not in the modern Orthodox world, as you can see, really in the Satmar sort of world. But I mean, he is Satmar, but he's way beyond that. I'll read you something I've said before, interesting things. An amazing thing in his latest Sefer, also, speaking in terms of natural morality. That was at the wedding of one of our listeners. Right, I got to speak to him. But let me just read you, and I'll end with this, what Rav Amital says in his book, Olam Haredim. Three passages on relevant to this. On page 30, he says as follows. Oh, yes, this is really interesting. He says that there are people who regard themselves as Yirei Shamayim, and they feel that once the Torah is given, the only thing that binds them is the Torah and nothing else. He says there's no such thing as Musar TV, no natural morality, just rock Torah, he says. And he says that they think you're lessening the kavod of Torah. If you say there's also natural morality, just like Rav Kook says, because the Torah should encompass everything. Because if you say natural morality, that's Ki'ilu Torah lo maspika, is as if the Torah, the written Torah, is not enough on its own. Rav Amital says by doing this, they create, as it were, a break between God, Yotzer Adam, who created the world, and God, who gave the Torah. They're saying basically that what God puts within us, our conscience, our moral sense, that has nothing to do with God. He says Hakadosh Baruch Hu created people with a conscience. Yesh devarim she'adam tzarich hargish. The things you have to feel. V'al yesod hamusar hativi tzrichim listakel ma Torah mosifa. You begin with the Musar TV, the natural morality, and then you look what the Torah adds to it. The Torah is going to add on to the Musar TV and bring you up higher and beyond that. But if the Torah is in conflict with the Musar TV, then there's a problem with how you understand Torah. He says that he gives another example. What does the Torah say? That Ammonite and Moabite shouldn't come into the congregation of Israel. Why not? Because they didn't bring you water and bread when you left Egypt. Rav Amital asks, is there one of the Shev Mitzvahs B'nai Noach that you have to go out and bring people water and bread when they're in the desert? Where is there such a mitzvah for the non-Jews to do. And so, you know what Rav Amital says? He says, yeah, you know what? There's no mitzvah. But this has nothing to do with a mitzvah. He says, "Lazek korim etzleinu yos b'nei adam, menschlichkeit." That's what's called being a mensch. Even for the goyim. They don't tell me, well, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't go bring there's no Shev Mitzvah Noach that they have to go give the Israelites water. There's something called being a mensch. Humanity requires it. Hamusar hativi hapashut mechayev. Im yesh anashim sholchim ederach tazor lehem. Your humanity tells you this. You don't need to think about, halachic angles here. Do I need to do this? Do I need to do this? Your conscience tells you to. It's the right thing. And Rav Amital says, if a non-Jew doesn't follow the Shabbat Mitzvah Noach, he sins, but he's not pasul for all the Dorot. He says what the symbolism of this is so important. Ammon and Moav, they're nifsal for all generations because they did not follow proper morality, even though it's not a halacha for them. But not everything is halacha. There's a morality. Two more passages from Rav Amital. Actually, I already see it's after the time, so I'll get to the other two passages next class. We'll begin with Rav Amital, and I love Rav Amital. But let me take some of the questions and the comments here now. How can your natural morality contradict the Torah? Well, we've seen by now, but you asked this at the beginning of the class. You could say the Torah says to have slavery. Does the Torah really say to have slavery? We'll get into more about slavery, what it means. But even the option to have slavery now, and yet your natural morality says that's immoral. There could be various halachot, which you think are immoral. So there's all sorts of examples. Um, um, at least you say, Rousseau admits that natural morality can be taught, and that relatively early a meal should be given as what is fair. Clearly, the Jewish natural morality, or Cook's speaking about, doesn't just come, you can't be raised in the jungle. This is a natural morality which arises through exposure to Jewish Torah texts. Clearly.
Rambam says that you can be disgusting with the permission of the Torah. I mean,
yes, of course, right. That's Rav Kook. This is the basis for what he's talking about here. You can be a navel b'reshus haTorah. You can be anyone who says all you need is Torah. You can marry a different woman every day and get drunk every day on kosher wine. So yes, you can be a navel b'reshus haTorah, a scoundrel with the permission of the Torah. So Torah is not enough. That's what the Ramban says, and that's Rav Kook is obviously following that. But Rav Kook goes even more than that because. Navel B'Reshus Torah is this then open up a whole separate? It's almost like a separate revelation. But maybe Rav Kook's ideas might just be a further development of what the Ramban is speaking about here. Rav Yaakov Weinberg speaks about this as well. There's some things that I mentioned before. I think when. Well, I don't need to get into it, but let me give you. I told you the story before, but it's been many years. So I went to Gateshead and I met with the the Rav of the city, Rabbi Rakov. He knew Rabbi Weinberg because he had been taught in the yeshiva in Montreux, Switzerland. So when I was there, I wanted to interview him. Before I went to him, there's a little Sfarim store at the yeshiva there, and I bought a sefer. And when I bought the sefer, the person asked me, I was younger then, I was a junior abroad, so I could have been a yeshiva student. And he asked me, are you a yeshiva student? Even with my American accent, he asked me, because they have people from America who go there. And I said, no, why? He said, because yeshiva students, let's say 5 pounds, yeshiva students, everyone else 7 pounds. So he asked me, are you in the yeshiva? I said, no. So I bought the book for 7 pounds. So later I was with Rabbi Rakov and I asked him, would it have been okay for me to ask one of the yeshiva students to buy the sefer for 5 pounds? And then I give the 5 pounds to the yeshiva student. He gives it to me. And Rabbi Rakov, he said to me, according to halacha, absolutely, it's fine. This yeshiva student buys it, makes a kinyan, and then you give him the 5 pounds. But then he says, but it wouldn't have been moral. So here's Rabbi Rakov, a Litvisher Rav, saying that halachically it would be okay. No one can challenge you luckily, but it wouldn't be moral because I'm not a yeshiva student. So I'm having to ask the yeshiva student to buy it so I get it. So we can have examples where something is halachically appropriate. No one can challenge it. But as Nikki said, you're a novel Birshus Torah. And that's also an important category. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, and this is famous, halacha is the floor, not the ceiling. That is, of course, we have to follow halacha. But if all you do is do halacha, and you're a baseline halacha person, you're going to end up being immoral. You might even end up in jail because the halacha is the floor, not the ceiling. You got to move beyond halacha. Um, Jack says, so is natural morality? It needs to be taught. Yes, it's a combination. It arises in your soul, but you don't see it without the education. I mean, if someone would be raised by terrible parents, or in in the middle of New Guinea or something with no exposure to Torah, they never would develop the same things. There has to be a day. Everyone has a basic natural morality, absolutely. I mean, how could Cain be punished for killing Hevel? I mean, there's an assumption that there's a basic natural morality. Even the Noahide laws, the assumption is that these are basic natural laws. But Jews go beyond that. And the natural morality Rav Kook speaks about is beyond this basic natural law which unites us with the non-Jews. So the essence of it is clearly there from the beginning, if it hasn't been overlaid with all this dirt. But as you learn more Torah, you become more sensitive. That's Rav Kook's whole point. You become more sensitive as you learn Torah. But then you could learn more and more Torah. If it's just focused on Gemara, then you could be Matarat to Sheretz. That's why Rav Sheilat, as was pointed out to me, it's important to learn Emunah. It's important to learn. There's lots of other things you need to learn. You can't just be a Talmudist. Um, Jack says it's a well-known phenomenon of the wisdom of the masses. Yes, the wisdom of the masses. Who was it who said that um, I'd rather, in terms of judges or something, I'd rather take the opinions of the first 500 people in the Boston phone book than the Harvard faculty. I mean, and we've seen in the last couple of years, the typical man on the street, their views are often more in line with the moral than the people with the advanced degrees at the our institutions of higher learning.
William Buckley.
William Buckley.
Buckley.
Buckley said it. Yes, thank you, William Buckley. Yeah. Okay. Joseph said, Rabbi Dov Lando said that he's against drafting a arranged army that's defending against problems that the army caused to begin with by existing. And I imagine that's how many haredim can justify it. Rabbi Dov Lando said that the problem is that there's a state. And we shouldn't have he's opposed to the existence of the state, in theory. There shouldn't be a state. Now, no Haredi leader has ever said that before, this Satmar-like position, no, in the Litvisha world. Uh, they said other things why they shouldn't go to the army. He said that the Zionists created all this problem. Now I don't know what he's thinking, that the British would have remained there. The British weren't going to remain there. So if there wasn't going to be a Jewish state, it was going to be an Arab state. If he wants to go live in Jordan or go live in Egypt, that's his prerogative. But Rav Yoshev never said this. Rabbi Steinman, none of them ever said this idea that the state itself is causing all these problems. But that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, you have to defend your people, your own people. And forget the irreligious. So I had a person who came on my tour a number of years ago when he was complaining to me. His son, Pesach night, had to do guard duty in, he said, one of these Haredi settlements. I guess it's Emmanuel. I don't know if they have other Haredi settlements in Yudah Shamron. Pesach night, he couldn't have his own Seder because had to do guard duty there because even in their own town, they wouldn't protect themselves. So now, fortunately, the Ger Hasidim are starting to carry guns and things. This is going to change, but it's going to change from bottom up. It's going to change because the religious Haredi masses know it's wrong. And there have been polls in which they've shown this, and young Haredi have entered the army because they sense it. They know this is wrong. You need to have a Talmudic brain, only a Talmudic brain, not to see that there's something wrong with this situation. And the younger Haredim, they do understand it, and the younger rabbis understand it, absolutely. Jack, you say Tanakh is the basis of Talmud. I don't think so. I don't think Tanakh is the basis of Talmud. For a long time, people studied the Talmud, and the only connection to Tanakh was if the verse appeared on the actual page. In fact, Rosh Shlomo Kluger and others actually state that you can't learn Tanakh. You're not allowed to because of the maskilim. So if Tanakh was actually Nach, I should say, was actually so important that just because the maskilim learn it, you can't say it's no good. So no. So uh, this is based on a Tosfos, which Hirsch says they misinterpreted, but Nach was never understood as the basis of Talmud. Torah, of course, is. There's a dual Torah. You have the written Torah, and then you have the oral Torah as is seen in the Gemara. And yes, Rabbi Lando is an anti-Zionist. And Janine, you said Rav Amital agrees with Rav Kook. Absolutely. Did Rav Kook believe that non-Jews also have natural morality? Yes, he does. There's a natural morality. That's the whole basis of the Noahide laws and why people can be punished even if they didn't hear any revelation. Um, however, um, it's at a lower level. Jews, he believes, have a special segula, and so yeah, um, probably not the same Moses Finley, but the person who cited, if someone wants to talk briefly, yes, that's the Moses Finley I'm talking about, is the one who wrote about Greek and Roman slavery. Exactly. Okay, so now you ask Joseph, what's needed to restore the Sanhedrin? We'll get to the Sanhedrin next class, and we'll see what the Sanhedrin will do and how it can do it. And would the Sanhedrin, we need a Sanhedrin to fix the Aguna issue? The Sanhedrin could do it. That's our problem. We don't have a mechanism today to make changes, but Rav Kook is going to explain what can be done, how it will be done. The only thing is we're missing a Sanhedrin. So do we need a Mashiach for a Sanhedrin? We'll get to that next class. And yes, David Novak will end with this. Sharon says wrote a book called Natural Law in Judaism. Oh, there's two more. Because there's a big debate. Is there natural law in Judaism? And to me, it's obvious that there is. But Marvin Fox, he had this idiosyncratic argument in opposition to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and David Novak. So, and MJ Franco, why is Dora Mabel published? Apparently, there's a natural morality. Exactly. Exactly. There's a natural morality. There's an assumption that on their own, people can figure out basic morality. Now, not detailed morality, but basic morality. That's otherwise there's no justification, not just for the Mabul, but for the whole Noahide system. Um, and Abba says there was never a Sanhedrin that executed a person. Are you saying that as a historical fact? Do we know that historically there never was a Sanhedrin that executed a person? Um, I mean, there's one opinion that says once in 7 years, the other says 70 years. And I mean, we have the whole issue of Jesus, but we know that Shimon ben Shetach, and we have other examples. So I think it's probably the case that there was a Sanhedrin. And don't forget that executed. And don't forget what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, that had you been running the show there, saying, we want the Sanhedrin shouldn't execute in 7 or 70 years. Had you been running the show, then murderers would have run rampant in Israel. I think it's Shimon Gamliel. The Sanhedrin the idea was that they would find all sorts of ways. What color socks did the person have, just to find a way to make sure they didn't execute them. So here's the question, by the way. We'll end with this. What does this mean? These people who say that the Sanhedrin should, once every 70 years, or if I was on the Beis Din, we never would execute someone. What are they doing? Are they frustrating the Torah law? Are they undermining Torah law? Are they saying that even though the person's guilty because of our moral sentiment, we're not going to execute the person? I mean, or are they saying, I mean, it's very hard to figure out what's going on there. If the Torah says to execute them, what's going on? I think Rav Kook might say, well, this is their moral sense. Each one of them has a different moral sense. And if your moral sense says it's wrong to execute someone, despite what the Torah says, you find a way not to. I'm not. Most people, the Rambam says that when it says an eye for an eye, the Rambam says it doesn't really mean an eye for an eye, and it never meant an eye for an eye. This is just the Torah's using this language for whatever reason they're using it, but there never was a Beis Din that actually did eye for an eye. And the Gemara says, how can you do an eye for an eye? Maybe my eye is good, your eye is bad. You knock out my eye, your eye. It's not equivalent. And the Rambam thinks that this is just here to teach us ideas about justice, but this was never ever practiced, eye for an eye. Josephus incidentally says that the person had a choice. If someone injured you, you could either get money or you could have the physical damage. Now, why would you get physical damage? Maybe if you're a rich person, you don't need the money, so you get it. But the Dor Revi, Rabbi Glasner states, and this is what all the academics say, that no, originally eye for an eye was literal, but the sages changed it through a drasha. I know this sounds reformist. That's why I mentioned that the Dor Revi says it. But Chazal have the authority to make these changes, and we will see Rav Kook next class how he's going to explain exactly how and why and when Chazal can make drashot to change the way Jewish law has been practiced until then, and the Torah gives them the authority to do that, and that's their obligation. Okay, Rabbi Kelman was not able to be here tonight. So and thank you, Madam J. Franco, for pointing out there was clearly capital punishment, etc. I thank you all for coming out tonight, and God willing, we'll see you next week with Rabbi Kelman back with us again. So good night, everyone.
Mark, look
Yes.
at I sent you an email with detailed information.
Yes, and thank you. You know what? I just ordered that book you mentioned by,
Okay.
it's a woman who wrote that article.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Shkoyach. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good night,
Mark,
everyone.
was
Yes.
is your Dvar Torah basically Derech Eretz Kadma Torah?
Well, I mean, we know Derech Eretz Karmat Torah, and Cook mentions Derech Eretz Karmat Torah. The question is, what does Derech Eretz mean? Derech Eretz for him includes natural morality. It's before ontologically, as the Rav would say, and in time. Yes, you need natural morality. Torah without natural morality is a phony Torah.
But
Okay, we'll pick up next week. Good night, everyone.